when I hire people, I say you have to have a baseline ability to do what I'm asking you to do. You have to be an incredible student of culture to work at Cross Church. And I think that translates about anywhere. If you're not going to be a student of the culture of where you're at, you're probably not going to make it, because you're going to be pushing your own ideals and your own expectations on something that's probably not going to change. And I've watched a lot of people come in, and people on my team who have wanted to be a culture changer, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it out of selfish ambition, and they fail, and they leave frustrated.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 28 of the Missional Marketing Podcast. This is our 152nd edition of the show. My name is Bart Blair, and it's my privilege to welcome you and to remind you that the reason we produce this podcast is to help churches grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. If you are a volunteer in your church or on the staff of your church, and you have a role in the marketing, the communications, the digital outreach, the web, the social media, whatever, you've come to the right place. We hope that the content that we're creating for you is helpful. And if it is, would you mind giving us some feedback? You can leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform, or you can leave us some feedback, some comments on our YouTube channel. We'd love to hear from you there. Hey, if you're listening to this in real time at the time that this podcast episode drops, we want to let you know that if you live in the Houston, Texas area or the Austin, Texas area, we have a live event coming to a church near you. On April 24th in Round Rock, Texas, that's just outside of Austin, we're going to have an event, a one-day church communications roadshow event at Radiant Church. On April 25th, the very next day, we'll be in Houston, Texas at Tallowood Baptist Church. This is a one-day event featuring members of our team. I will be there personally doing some in-person coaching, workshop, and just relationship building with other church communications directors in your area. So we would love to meet you there. You can click over to our website, churchcommunications.com, look for the roadshow events, and you can get all of the registration details there. You might remember Jason Hamrock and Katie Allred sharing the details about these roadshow events on a podcast earlier this year. Well, they're happening. They're happening live and in person. And so we'd love to meet you if you have an opportunity to come hang out with us there. And that's all I want to say about that. Let me introduce our guest for this week's episode. His name is Brian Dunaway. He serves at a phenomenal church in Northwest Arkansas called Cross Church. Cross Church has about 3 campuses. No, not about 3. They have exactly 3. Their weekend worship attendance is about 9,000. They had over 17,000 people at their Easter services just the last couple of weeks at the time that we're recording this podcast. It's an old church. They've been around for 150 years, but they're doing ministry in a very relevant and very effective way. And Brian's just a phenomenal leader. It was a real privilege for us to have him on the show today. He has been in the seat of church communications at his church for more than a decade, and just has a wealth of information and insight to share with us on this particular episode. I hope that you will get as much out of it as I did. Here's Jason Hamrock, the CEO of Missional Marketing, and our interview with Brian Dunaway.
Well, hey, Brian, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you on board. You're a director of communications at a pretty large church, so I can relate well, because that was my background. I spent 11 years at a mega church here in Phoenix. But share with us a little bit of you, your background. Let's talk about Cross Church and just kind of fill in our audience.
Sure. Yeah. Again, happy to be here. I feel like I don't have a lot of, y'all are well beyond my years of doing this. And so I'm excited to learn from y'all as well. I've been in this position for about 12 years. I have kind of a unique situation where this is home for me. So my parents were married in this church. I grew up in this church under one pastor the entire time. Was saved in this church, baptized, all of it. Met my wife here. Have had one of our 2 kids here, and just kind of grew into this position, I guess. So I was an intern. We've all done youth internships, and was in student ministry, and that kind of, I was doing everything from setting up chairs to cleaning bathrooms to mowing the student pastor's lawn. And I thought, how is this what this is all about? But you get 25 years removed from that and you turn around and you go, oh, okay, it did matter. But yeah, so I was an intern, and then we started our second campus. We just were one campus for a lot of years. The church, the original church is 100. We just passed the 150-year mark just a few years ago.
That's cool.
So a lot of history. And then we started a second campus. I went to college in the area, stayed as an intern, and then out of college was the media director for our second campus. Did that for a couple of years, and then took a little bit of a break and did some other production. My background is in production, and then fast forward about 8 years later, I got a call to what I say, come home. And what actually came back as the IT director, which I had zero qualifications for that. I do love people, and I love the relationships. And so they just brought me back to kind of bend the mold of stereotypical IT. But I really had no idea what all that meant at a church this side. I was just like, yeah, I'm ready to come home. So we took it, and fast forward there to about 6 months later, and the guy that was doing communications, he decided his calling was somewhere else. And the executive pastor set me down and said, we know your background and we want you to do this. And I had just come out of a church. It was a great experience, but I was kind of over all the production stuff. And I said, I don't think I really want to do that. And he said, do you want a paycheck? And I said, I do want that. So sign me up. I'd love to do this. But it wasn't quite that tough. But yeah, so fast forward 12 years, and my role is my title is Director of Communications and Technology. So we've just kind of developed this weird, mushy deal where I'm like the IT director, the media guy, and the communication director is all under the umbrella of my office. But I will be the first off, want to say that I have a team around me that can do a whole lot of things that I cannot do. And so that's how I say I kind of fell into the position.
Yeah, I can relate though. You surround yourself with talented people. How did you surround yourself with gifted people?
Well, I mean, only God. God brought people our way that I didn't know from parts of the country I didn't know. And looking back, as we all do, it's just like, how did this happen? And you can only say God was in control. Yeah. And if God wants you to do it and he's got it planned, it's going to happen. And so the church has been is Southern Baptist. And so we have this, the Southern Baptist world that we lived in, and the church has been over the years pretty nationally spotlit. With Ronnie Floyd was the pastor, and we were on national TV and sometimes international TV, and Ronnie Floyd was involved in Southern Baptist life. And so all that to say, there was connections that some of our other staff had. As soon as I took the job, one of our staff members, Buster Prey, who is a worship pastor here for years, he said, I know a guy in Atlanta. And I was like, great, because I'm dying on the vine here. So I called John Phillips. We did some interviews over the phone. He flew in. We talked. I was like, you can do a lot of things I can never do. Do you want to take the job? And he and I have been together ever since. And then just stuff like that. So just trying to be connected and make connections and build relationships. We now hire a lot of kids out of college. Wow. And realize that we're probably going to have them for a couple of 3 years. And so we use that as kind of an onboarding, jump off point for some of these kids. And it's really worked well. So we have 3 or 4 foundational team members in different parts of the ministry that we know we're going to hire these kids and then hopefully send them off to do bigger and better things.
Brian, what are some of the specific roles that you have with some of your longtime team members who are kind of anchoring the team with you?
Yeah. So like John Phillips, I just mentioned him. He is over our video and social media platforms. And so he's got 2 guys that work underneath him doing all the video production that we see in the church, all the exterior social media stuff. He's a great graphic designer. I wouldn't say I planned it this way, but I'll stop and say that we have intentionally hired um, jack of all trades. And so, you guys understand that in the church
Yep.
world, you might be the music guy and the tech guy, and it's just how it works. And so John is he has his niche, but he is great at a lot of things like graphic design. So we have this team, we have graphic designers, and that's pretty much what they do. But John is one of those guys that he can build awesome graphics, he can do great videos, and then he can sit in a seat in the production world and run a soundboard or run ProPresenter for us. And we try not to mesh those all together, but when when it's necessary, it's really helpful. Our guy that's our IT director has been with me for the 12 years as well. I inherited him, and he's grown into a position where, you think IT and you think the guy that sits at the keyboard all day, and he is actually one of our lighting designers in the production world. Now, how weird is that you think of if you go back and think of Dilbert at the computer in the old comics, you're like, that dude runs your lights. Yeah. But God's gifted him in different areas, and we've really tried to mine those giftings and utilize them if their heart's there to do bigger things. So we got John, and we've got what we call global. We use the word global that looks over all 3 campuses. And Justin was one of those guys early on that our worship pastor said, "Hey, you need to hire this kid." And now he's not a kid anymore. He's married and 2 kids of his own. And he's got a heart for ministry and people and production. And so he's one of our staple guys. I tell him all the time, if you leave, I'm right behind you. And then Chase, our IT director, he's one of those staple guys. And so those are like foundational members. My assistant, Sandra, has been in the church forever and ever since I was probably little, but she brings so much wisdom, and she is so detailed. Y'all know creatives are just not very detailed a lot of times. The tracks and the train do not always go together with those kind of people, but you got to have them. And so she's our detail mama that keeps everything on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. I want to go back to like you're mentioning the guy that oversees video and social media, and that's very interesting these days because really social media is all about short form video and reels. That's how you use social media, right? And have your video team be a part of that. In fact, to oversee it is a really good strategic move.
Yeah. And again, I'd like to take credit for that, but he just kind of fell into it. He's like, "Hey, I think because we were all kind of babies when we started this in our turn. Like he came in here and he turned 30, and I was just a little over 30. And so we didn't really know up from down. And we just kind of grew into it. And that you're right. I mean, video is driven to social media by short form, and those guys just run with it. So he's got 2 guys underneath him that just really gravitate towards that. And it's really exploded our social media presence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really cool to see when I talk to comm directors who've been there, you've been in your seat for a minute. So you've been able to understand the culture of your church, and then just figure out how to staff and move people to what works best, not only for the people that God's brought, but it's also then how you're serving leadership and understanding what we're trying to achieve as a church. And I think that's probably some good advice for comm directors listening in, is that you said this earlier, Brian, you didn't do this. God brought all these people, but it always starts with, I know a guy. It seems like
absolutely. Absolutely.
And then understanding how you whatever God brings to you, there's a reason and there's an intentionality for that to happen. And it sounds like that's really how you've really carved this department.
Yeah. Looking back, I realized I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah. And again, all the glory to God for just keeping me there and letting me fail forward. And still don't know what I'm doing. And we're just making it up as we go, asking God to bless it and be in his will. And so far he has, and we have a team that is the intentionality of building the team that I could say went before me is I wanted a team that wasn't ego driven, that was very servant minded, production world and creative world and worship world, that's a lot of ego just naturally. I mean, those guys, the creative world is very ego driven, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Yeah.
It's in the Bible that way. Satan was a worship pastor. And I tell our worship guys that all the time. Who was a worship pastor? No, but that even in our worship ministry, we've fallen into this deal, and intentionally, unintentionally, where we want a culture of servant minded, humble people. And I think God has really honored that. I don't think I know, because you don't have all this, well, I know better. And they can work with the ministries of the church, and especially in a multi-campus situation where if you have one kids pastor, you have three kids pastors. You have one student ministry, you have three student ministries. And so we're constantly battling that. And we really need to have people on our teams that can put themselves in the back seat and work with other people.
Yeah. So 12 years on the job, how have you kept yourself from burning out? Or maybe you have. I should have asked that question.
No, I love it. I love the church. I love this church. People say, would you go anywhere else? I mean, they have to call first. Nobody's calling. So, I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. But I love Cross Church. I don't know. I've been asked that question. I don't feel, first of all, I think we use the word burnout too much. I think that's an overused word, but that's a whole other podcast. I think there's probably some degree of lack of work ethic and lack of understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. And that, again, another podcast, but, I don't know. I love it. I love it. There's bad days. It's work. But I never have had a problem, and I can't say that this is how it is everywhere, but when you're doing what matters and you believe in what you're doing, you've got a lot more longevity than probably somebody that doesn't believe in the mission, doesn't believe in what they're doing. And so I saw an interview once with a quarterback that he got hurt. He came back, went to another school, and they said, how do you do this? And then he said, I play every down like it's my last. And I don't know how long this season's going to last. I mean, 12 years is a long time anywhere, doing anything. And if tomorrow's the last day, I want to know that I played every down like it was my last down. And that fuels me, because seasons are just that. They're seasons, and they come and they go. And I love the season I'm in. I love where my kids are at, and they're involved with me in the church, and the family's involved, and we just roll. And so that doesn't answer the question, but let
me ask a follow-up to you there, Brian, because I think, a lot of times when we talk to people who have had what we'll call burnout experiences, even though we're overusing that word,
I think they're real. Yeah, I get it.
Oftentimes when we're talking to people who have been in situations like that, a lot of it stems from the culture of the organization that they're in, that the organization as a whole does not have a healthy rhythm of ministry and life. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with your senior leadership team. How do you work? We've talked a little bit about the team that you lead. Let's talk a little bit about those that are leading you. And what do you think it is that you guys are able to do in your relationships with each other that keep the culture healthy for you and for the rest of the team that you lead?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a ton of experience, so there's probably listeners that are going to be like, yeah, you just don't get it. But I have we're in a very great season culturally, a very healthy season culturally. So Ronnie Floyd was the senior pastor for 32 plus years. I worked hand in hand with him for 5 years solid, traveling with him. I was with him all the time. I tell people I got to a point where I could almost speak the next word of his sentence. Now, 5 years ago, Nick Floyd, his son, took over. And that's a whole other story. It's incredible. But he was the succession plan. And Pastor Ronnie went off and did a couple other things. And so Nick and I actually grew up together, which was interesting. And now his executive pastor, Ryan Blackwell, we all grew up together. So it's just this weird, unique, I don't know, again, that I have a lot of authority to speak on it, but they're very much driven by healthy culture, having, one-on-ones, making sure people are in the right headspace. Their walk with the Lord is strong. And it's not this I'm over you mentality and you have to be subservient to me. We're kind of flat. Obviously he's the boss. I'm going to do what he says. But we have conversations. We can speak openly. We don't have to, hide behind anything and, have these unhealthy conversations behind a closed door that help us feel better for a minute, but don't accomplish anything. And so I am probably one of the rarities that says we have a great culture, and really, I couldn't tell you one person on staff that I just can't stand. I mean, it's just a great season of the church. So I don't really have a lot to offer that other than that does attribute to longevity. And so I apologize if I was too harsh in over the burnout comment, but I think it is real. I do think it is real. It has not been real to me, and therefore I can't speak to it. But I think that there's a generation of behind us that uses that word for an excuse sometimes.
As the director of communication, how do you know what a win is?
Oh gosh, you didn't say you were going to ask me hard questions.
Sorry, you're a seasoned
I told
veteran.
you he wasn't going to stick to the script. He did not stick to the
No, I
script.
wasn't on the list. Well, that's a good question, and it's a hard one to answer. I feel like, let me say this. I tell our team all the time that there's nothing that we do that is going to grow the church, that's up to God. We're just a small piece. We're a tool and an avenue that helps further the gospel. I think that is good to keep in mind. As far as a win, I think when people aren't walking around going, what are we doing? Where are we going? What's the purpose? That's a win. Mm-hmm. And if we miss that mark, then we're not winning.
Yeah.
So there's been times where people aren't communicated well, either in the walls or outside the walls. And that directly affects attendance, engagement, that kind of thing. But that's probably, how does it result, and how, are people walking around looking like they don't know what's going on? That's how I kind of gauge it, I guess.
Yeah. I'll answer, because, I sat in the seat for 11 years and I had these little, I kind of define them as the micros and the macros. So the micro wins would be, hey, we were able to, get everything out on time, and there was no typos, and, in week in and week out, we hit our deadlines and stuff like that. We were serving the ministries. Those were the micro wins. And yet that didn't bring me joy. What brought me joy were the macros. When I'd sit in church and I'd watch baptisms take place, and I'd see just, I'd be literally crying when you're watching two young kids baptizing their mom, for example, and you're going, only God, and I got to be a part of that. Now I got to be a part of that because I'm part of the team. And I don't know where I am on that journey of that family, but I know I got to play a role in it. And I think that for me, it was the end of I don't say the end of the line, but it's when you see somebody giving their life to Jesus, you're like, that's what brought me joy. And I celebrate that with my team, even though we maybe only had a little tiny part in it. Those were the macro wins for me. And that was just my joy. So I needed to always tap into that, because that kept me going. That kept it fresh. That kept it, we do go through cycles and seasons, right? That's the church ministry calendar year. It just rotates over and over and over again. How do you find the win, and how do you find the joy in what you do?
I'm going to use that. See, thank you for that. I'm using that next comm team meeting. I'm not giving you credit. I'm taking the credit.
I think about Jason, you played football, and I played a little bit of sports. Brian, I don't know if you were a sporty guy or not, but there's the fundamentals of every sport. And being a football player, you've got to block, you got to tackle, you got to do the basic things. And that doesn't really matter how well you do those things if the team doesn't accomplish the team goal, which is to win the game. it's always a little disappointing. Very few athletes play the game for individual accolades. And I bring this up, Brian, because one of the things you clearly emphasized in your culture is having a team of people who don't live with ego, that don't do their work because of ego, that they're there to serve the church as a whole. And that really, it sounds like a top down cultural component, a value in your organization that really resonates with me. I appreciate you sharing.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Share a little bit with us about just sort of what a week in the life of you and your team actually looks like. What are the major pieces that you do have to accomplish each week? And maybe what are some of the systems and processes that you have in place that actually enable you to get maybe those micro wins to make sure that there are no typos?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sunday's always coming in this world. And then there's the big Sundays, Easter, Christmas, VBS, all the events surrounding that. That make up the church calendar year. And it's pretty typical across for all of us in all the church world. We try to, so the way our structure is we have a leadership team of about 12, 14 guys, and I have the privilege of sitting on that team. And so that's our Monday meeting. So we come right out of Sunday and we go into that meeting Monday afternoon. And that's where campus pastors, myself, our financial guy, senior pastor, we all sit in that meeting. We go around, we have an agenda. We talk about what we need to talk about for the week to come, talk about what we need to for big events that we have on the plate, that kind of stuff. We pray together. We spend a lot of time praying together. And out of that meeting, then I turn around and go into our communication team meeting. And we hash out what's coming up. So I'll learn a lot of things out of that meeting, and I go straight into it with my, ink's barely dry on the notes. And I say, hey, these things are coming up. These weren't on our radar. Now they got to be on our radar. So we spend the first 2 or 3 days really trying to hit the next Sunday. In the middle of that, obviously there's a student event, or there's a college night event, or there's a social media post that has to happen. And where we are now, I don't have to be in the weeds of that as much. Those guys kind of drive that. So John drives a lot of that stuff already. We've been together so long, and we don't hash out all the little minutia things. But I would say that weekly, that's kind of the rhythm. And then by Wednesday afternoon, if we're not pretty well wrapped up for Sunday, then something is wrong. As far as, the crossing the T's and dotting the I's, we have a process in place that everything that goes out goes through 3 levels of proofing. There is nothing that I hate more than misspelled, bad grammar. And I am the worst one I can't do it. So when the team will send me something to approve, I will say in quotes, "It looks good." That means I did not read it in its entirety, and do not say that this is a sign off. This is not a sign off. Send it through proofing. Make sure all the things are right. But as far as the layout, it looks good. But we've identified about 3 ladies in our church that God has gifted them with the gift of proofing, and they're not necessarily on our team, but they're part of the staff, and they work well in that environment, and they see everything from sermon slides to stuff that goes out on social media. We don't do a bulletin in the traditional sense, but we have our app. We still call it the bulletin. Digital bulletin has to go through all the proofing mechanisms. And that's across the board. So they all have to see that. They're reading constantly, and I'm reading as little as possible on that stuff. I can read it, but I'm not going to tell you if that period or that comma was in the right place.
How far ahead do you guys try to get with projects and stuff?
So Nick, the senior pastor, Nick Floyd, he is out probably 6 to 8 weeks on sermons, which is awesome. And he can be months at a time out. He and the teaching staff, they will come up with a sermon series a year in advance. So we'll know the direction for like graphics and stuff like that. We can start working on that. It just varies. That's a tough
there are
question.
A whole lot of comms directors right now that are crying. They're crying because if they can get their pastor to work 8 days out, then
I know. I know. Yeah, it's just a mixed bag. It really is. And so, what I've had to do is just learn who works ahead and who doesn't work ahead, and we try to build margin within that framework.
So we own church communications group as well as missional marketing, and so we run that one as well, and that's comprised of a lot of people. We've got a Facebook group of about 34,000. And what's interesting that we've learned over the years is that the turnover in the comms department tends to be kind of high. Like they'll stick around for 2 or 3 years and then they chase more money, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. People are trying to climb the ladder, if you will. So what kind of advice, somebody who's been in your seat for 12 years, what kind of advice or wisdom would you speak to a comms, a fairly new comms director who's probably sat in the seat now for maybe even just a few months? What kind of, what should they be preparing themselves for, and how can you help them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that one of the big pieces that a lot of people miss is you have to get to know the leadership. Whoever is above you, you need to be lockstep with that. And I will say, from just 5 years ago's experience, like I said, with our former pastor, I could think for him. And even though I grew up with his son, it was a very difficult transition, not because of him, but because I tried to take that mentality into this relationship, and it did not necessarily translate. So we had to learn each other. And I would say that you have to be a student of the culture that you're in. And that is probably, when I hire people, I say you have to have a baseline ability to do what I'm asking you to do. You have to be an incredible student of culture to work at Cross Church. And I think that translates about anywhere. If you're not going to be a student of the culture of where you're at, you're probably not going to make it, because you're going to be pushing your own ideals and your own expectations on something that's probably not going to change. And I've watched a lot of people come in, and people on my team who have wanted to be a culture changer, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it out of selfish ambition, and they fail, and they leave frustrated because they weren't willing to give being a student of the culture an opportunity. So, student of the culture, student of your leadership, understanding what they want, drinking it all in early on gives you a lot more runway. So if you say, okay, that's how he thinks, that's how she thinks, that's what he wants, that's what he expects, and it doesn't, and it's work, because it doesn't just fit. One size does not fit all. So how our executive pastor thinks and how our senior pastor thinks, they go together a lot, but when they don't, I've got to learn that, so that when I see these different places where they're going to differ, I can go, okay, Ryan thinks that way, and Nick thinks that way, and this preschool lady thinks this way. And so that understanding of how people operate will, and I'm not talking like we spend a lot of time with personality tests and what the makeup is. And I think those are very important. I think they can help you on the initial, but you've got to really deep dive relationally. So I think that's my advice. I think building relationships with people, this mentality, or this departmental part, this communications department, is not necessarily built on relationships. It's like, what can I do for you? What do you need me to do? I'm just a cog in the wheel. And so I really push our team to build relationships with people, because relationships will build an umbrella of grace past, we didn't make the deadline. When you have a relationship with somebody, you can wade through a lot of water.
That's worth its weight in gold right there, people. Is be a student of the culture. And you might have the greatest ideas, but like you said, if it goes against the culture and leadership, you are not going to last. You're either going to burn out or get fired. I mean, because and I have seen that time and time and time again, and it's it blows my mind. So very well said.
Yeah, typically when you're joining the staff of not just a church, of any organization, you're agreeing covenantally to become a part of that community and a part of that culture. And I think that's especially with younger staff members, younger leaders, people who are earlier in their career, they don't necessarily always recognize that it's not just a job that you've been hired to do, but it's a community that you're being asked to fit into. And I had little flashbacks, when you were talking about people who've come in and are trying to change the way things are because they have an ideal about the way that it should be. And maybe in their interview process or in their job search, they weren't as clear on the fact that they were walking into something that was already established. And you've got a 150-year-old church that has a culture established, and a 23-year-old college graduate is not likely to make much of a difference in terms of changing that. Here's my advice. And Jason knows that I am a huge advocate of church planting. If you want to have a big part in the say of the way a church develops its culture, go join a church plant. There's not much pay. Or maybe there's none. You may be a volunteer communications director in a church plant. But if you want to be a church communications director and you want to actually be able to contribute to creating the culture, that's where you do that. You're not going to be able to do that in a 150-year-old church.
Yeah. Well, and I think that longevity creates influence. Mm-hmm. And so 12 years in, I turn around and really kind of sometimes awe that I have some influence in things that happen. And it's very humbling, but it didn't come overnight, and it shouldn't have come overnight. Nope. And our society is all about me right now. And unfortunately, and it probably bleeds into church a lot. And if you can say it's not about me, and get that out of the way, you have a greater opportunity to last and find a voice.
Yeah, really well said. All right, well, let's land this plane because we've been asking tough questions, and we gotta wrap it up. But just where do you get your inspiration? Like, who are you following? Podcasts or books or things like that?
Yeah, that's I look at a lot of Groeschel stuff. We look at a lot of Church of the Highlands. Yeah. Those guys are doing a lot of things well. Robbie Gallaty, his church, they're doing great things. And so, we try to just stay on top of what churches that are growing are doing. And especially in the communication world. Yeah. I don't know that I could give you like a set of like, you got to listen to this podcast, you got to read these books. But I also rely a lot on my team. Like, they love to dive into that. Hey, look what this church is doing. Look what, even secular production. We can learn a lot from that. How do we take that and use it to influence for the kingdom? So I don't know, just a lot of different places, just trying to keep our eyes peeled all the time going, what if we could do this? But I'm probably not the best at all of that. Like, I do read quite a bit, but I don't like dive into communication 101 books. Yeah. So, that's just not how I'm built. Again, I'm not a communication director by birth. I just fell into it. And realized real quick that if I didn't have the right people around me, I wasn't going to make it. And so guys like John Phillips, who is constantly bringing me stuff going, what should we try this? I saw that. And I'm like, yeah, let's try it. What I try, the boundary that I build around myself and all that is that cultural conversation. How does what other people are doing fit into the culture of Cross Church, and not losing the culture in an attempt to be somebody we're not? And so when we're doing social media, when we're, making videos, there's all these churches doing things differently, maybe not better, maybe better, just different. And sometimes there's not a right or wrong. There's an opinion, and there is the reality that our church sits in Northwest Arkansas in 3 locations, and we have to meet people where they are. And we don't want to give a perception that we're something we're not. So we do that a lot. That's one of our rules on social media. Do not, because anything can be photoshopped, and now AI is making that whole world a mess. And So, I want people to, and we have it a lot of churches have this. Hey, I've watched you online, especially with COVID and where it was at. People are watching online and they'll show up and they'll be like, I've been watching you online for 2 years and I finally came to the church.
Yeah.
That if we're talking about wins, that's one of my biggest wins is when they show up to the physical front door and they don't see or feel anything different than they saw and felt online as far as a perception, a persona, then I think that's a huge win. No, I'm leaning a lot on our team to bring those things to me. But again, I love Grochelle's stuff. Church of the Highlands stuff is phenomenal. They're doing big things and really lean on them.
They're called Long Hollow. Is that what it is?
Long Hollow.
Long Hollow.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're all, I would say those guys are doing the best that they do at anything that they do within the understanding of this is who we are. And, Passion City, those guys, I mean, they're breaking the walls down on what you can do in church, production wise, social media wise. They're setting the standard on some of that stuff. And so we try to be imitators, but not, in a way that says, oh, we're trying to be this. We are Cross Church. We feel like we know who we are pretty well. And we just glean little bits and pieces and try to do the best we can.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thanks so much for hanging out with Jason and me today. You are at Cross Church in Northwest Arkansas. If anybody's passing through Northwest Arkansas, they can come and knock on your door and say hi. But if they're not passing through Northwest Arkansas, maybe have some questions or would like to connect with you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just go to crosschurch.com, go to our staff page, and I'm on the staff page.
That's how I found you. Works pretty well.
Great.
Yeah.
Did it work all right?
It worked just fine. Yeah, it was great. You got back to me and here you are on the show. Thanks again. We really appreciate you hanging out with us. Those of you who have listened all the way to the end here, we thank you very much for sticking with us. Just a reminder that if you haven't subscribed wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, make sure you do that. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. That helps other people find the podcast. Jason and I are going to be recording a Burning Questions episode here in the next couple of weeks. So if you haven't ever submitted one of your burning questions, now would be the time to do that. You can email that to me at info@missionalmarketing.com. Just put in the subject line, you got a burning question or a communications question or a podcast question, and we'll try to work that question into one of our next Burning Questions episodes. Jason, thanks for hanging out with us. Brian, adieu.